Hi everyone, in this video we are going to be talking about different agents of evolution, so different ways that evolution can come about. And just remember that when we're talking about evolution, what we mean is a change in allele frequency over time. And if that definition doesn't speak to you, there's a different, I guess a more visual way of thinking about it down here. So when we're thinking about evolution, we always have a particular population in mind that we're considering, and that population is going to be composed of individuals, and each individual is going to have different alleles for each of their genes. And so one way to think about evolution is thinking about the gene pool for a particular population, and the gene pool is just composed of the individuals in that population and their alleles for a given gene. So this is depicted down here where each oval is an individual, and you can see that the alleles that they have are represented as well. So we've got big A's and little a's. Some people are heterozygous, some people are homozygous dominant, and some people are homozygous recessive. And over time, the gene pool might shift such that the individuals in that population have a different genetic makeup than the previous generations. So you can see that by generation 10, it looks like the proportion of homozygous dominant people or organisms is going down, whereas the proportion of homozygous recessive people is increasing. And by generation 20, the entire population is composed of only homozygous recessive people. And so this is a visual way to see that the allele frequency has changed in these 20 generations, such that the little a allele is more common, it's 100%, and the big A allele has declined. There's none of the big A allele left over 20 generations. So this is just a different way to think a little bit more visually about what we mean when we say evolution is a change in allele frequency over time. Okay, so this is a list of the different forces of evolution that we're going to be talking about in this video. We'll really quickly cover natural selection because there was a whole nother video devoted to that. We'll go over genetic drift, which you should have read about already, and then we'll describe gene flow, mutation, and non-random mating. Okay. So natural selection is the key phrase that we talked about is when there's a heritable variation leading to differential reproductive success. So the big thing for natural selection is that we've got differences in specific traits between individuals in a population. If those traits are beneficial, those individuals will survive and pass on those traits to their offspring. And in this way, beneficial traits will become more common in future generations, and less beneficial traits will go away or become less common. And of the forces of evolution that we're going to be talking about today, natural selection is the only one that produces adaptations. And adaptations are beneficial traits that have come about through evolution. So when we see really good camouflage, for example, or that help organisms evade predators, or if we think about other sort of adaptations that help organisms be better suited to their environment, these are all brought about by natural selection. So natural selection is the only force that's going to make a population better suited for its environment. Okay, we'll go pretty quickly through genetic drift as well, since it's something that you should have read about already. So remember that genetic drift is a change in allele frequency due to random chance. And another way to think about this is the term sampling error. So if you're designing a survey or something and you're going to give it to a sample, so you want to get the sense of, let's say you wanted to survey the Bush School population, but you don't want to give a survey to every single student. The best kind of survey that you could give would be one where the survey group that you select accurately reflects the Bush population as a whole. But if you pick only the students who are taking advanced biology to give your survey to, your survey responses might not be reflective of the general population of Bush, right? Like, it's probably not the case that all the students in advanced bio have the same feelings about whatever you're surveying as the school as a whole. So this is essentially what happens with genetic drift, is you get like a bad survey of the population of the population as a whole. And the two common ways that this can happen are called bottleneck effects and founder effects. And so a bottleneck effect is when there's some sort of natural disaster or other cataclysmic event where you get a severe reduction in the number of individuals in a population. And then the few that survive are going to sort of remake the population, and whatever alleles they happen to have are going to be overrepresented in the resulting population. And I have a picture of a cheetah here because I think it was in the last ice age, there was a mass extinction event for cheetahs. And so all of the cheetahs that are surviving today can trace their ancestry back to these the small number of cheetahs that survived that last ice age. And because of this, cheetahs have a really low, their genetic diversity is very low. They are very, very similar to one another. And so yeah, that's what I'm saying for that. And then the other thing is a founder effect. And so this is when a small number of individuals from a population go and establish a new population somewhere else. And whatever alleles they happen to have are going to be overrepresented in that new population. And I have a picture here of this island, Tristan da Cunha, and this is in the Atlantic Ocean, I think between South Africa and or not South Africa, South America and Africa. And one of the settlers, there was a British settler or colonizer, maybe. There was a British guy who came over here and had a lot of the population can trace their ancestry back to him. And he was a carrier for this really severe disease that causes these visual impairments, and it's a degenerative visual impairment situation, retinitis pigmentosa. So a lot of people on the island have this disease because this British guy came over and he was a carrier for the disease. So genetic drift, just by chance, be it some natural disaster where just some people end up surviving, or some people sort of set out and populate a new area, we're getting overrepresentation of their genes or their alleles. Regardless of the exact type of genetic drift that we have, one outcome is going to be that there's reduced genetic variation. So since you're starting off with a small number of organisms establishing a population, there's just not going to be as much genetic diversity as if there was a whole population that you were starting out with. Okay, the next force of evolution is called gene flow. And this is when alleles are moved from one population to another. And obviously, the alleles aren't getting up and moving themselves. They're coming with an organism. So this can happen if, for mobile organisms that can move, they can just bring their alleles with them and introduce them into a new population. Or for things like plants, their spores or pollen could travel in the wind to a new area. And so we're going to increase the genetic diversity of the recipient population because we're introducing new alleles for whatever population the alleles come into. But simultaneously, in the population where individuals are leaving, we might get reduced genetic variation. So gene flow, it depends whether individuals are coming in or whether individuals are leaving. It's not necessarily beneficial or harmful. The new individuals that are coming in, they could have helpful alleles that will become more common over time as they breed with the existing population, or they could have detrimental alleles, in which case those alleles that they're bringing in might not stay around for very long if natural selection is acting on the population. Okay, second to last, we've got mutation. So mutation is the only way that we're introducing new alleles, just generally speaking, right? Alleles are different variations of particular genes, and the only way that we get new alleles is by when mutations happen. So as mutations come into existence, they can be helpful, they can be neutral, or they can be harmful. So what happens to these mutations and resulting alleles will depend on which of those things they are, but just the sort of raw material of evolution, you can trace it all the way back to some mutation that arose. And then finally, we have non-random mating. So this is this is an idea that it's not equally likely for any two potential pairs to mate with one another. So this brings into the equation this idea of sexual selection, and some traits that help an individual attract a mate aren't necessarily beneficial for their survival, right? So you could think of like a peacock's tail, male peacocks that have really beautiful tail situations. That will help them to attract a mate and therefore pass those genes on to their offspring. But it might not help them evade like a predator. I don't actually know if peacocks have predators, but you could imagine this, right? Like a lot of brightly colored organisms. It might help them simultaneously attract a mate, but also make them more visible to predators. So, non-random mating is another form of selection, where the selection isn't necessarily for advantageous traits, but rather for traits that help attract a mate. Okay, so those are, this is the end of this video. We talked about, I'll go back to the first slide here. We talked about 5 different ways that evolution or a change in allele frequency can arise. We have natural selection, genetic drift, gene flow, mutation, and non-random mating. So yeah, I will talk to you guys soon.